something ugly. Fucking walked right into that.
Iron sights allow for better first shot accuracy over point firing, while also being smaller, lighter, and cheaper than an optic, and they don't need batteries either. A good set of sights for airsoft has adjustments for both windage and elevation, and a clear and open sight picture that is good for both low focus and high focus aiming. Modern marksmanship doctrine states that you should align the sights, focus your vision on the front sight, place the front post on the target, and fire. The only change to this technique for airsoft is to bring your focus back onto the target once the sights are aligned in order to better see your BBs in flight and adjust for variables like wind. For the purpose of this video, we will call this technique high focus aiming, since it requires more time and visual focus to complete. However, high focus aiming is counter to human instinct. Sight is the strongest of our 5 senses, and we depend on it heavily in combat, whether it be real or pretend. When your brain identifies a threat, your first instinct is to look at it and focus your eyes on it. This is pretty much always your first reaction to a surprise target, such as an enemy suddenly coming around a corner or ambushing you. It takes a conscious effort to override that instinct and use high focus aiming. So taking aim while keeping your vision focused on the target is called low focus aiming, since your focus never comes to the front sight. Low focus aiming is a very useful skill, as it's much faster than high focus aiming and overall well suited to shooting on the move. With that in mind, a good set of sights are quick to align with an open and clutter-free sight picture for low focus aiming, but still allow for a natural transition into high focus aiming when you can afford the extra moment to be more precise. The sights on this basic bitch CM16 are a perfect example of this. If you quickly bring the gun on target and keep your visual focus on the target itself, the front post and ears blur out a bit, but mostly stay the same. Meanwhile, the ears and aperture of the rear sight blur together into a large trough, and as long as you keep those 3 vertical lines vaguely inside that trough, your point of impact will be somewhere in the middle of those 3 fuzzy lines. Then, if you slow down, align the sights, and then refocus on the target, you have a fine front post in the middle of a large ring without much visual clutter to stop you from seeing the BBs in flight. It's also important that your sights have adjustment for both windage and elevation so that you can properly zero them. Speaking of zeroing iron sights, it's a bit different than zeroing an optic. With an optic, the point of impact and point of aim should be the same, or as close as possible. Applying the same method to iron sights doesn't work because you can't see through the front post. Like I said earlier, our instinct is to maintain line of sight with a threat, so it's only natural to aim low and prevent the sights from obstructing your view of the target. You can compensate for this by adjusting your sights to shoot a bit high. This will also give you a better view of your BBs in flight when using high focus aiming. Now that I've covered the basics, let's go over which styles of sights are good, which ones are bad, and which ones can be improved with a little DIY. Speaking of which, there's a couple of universal tricks you can use to make any sight picture a little faster and better suited for BB slinging. You can paint the front sight in a fluorescent color so that it better catches your eye. Orange is the best color in my opinion, but neon blue or green would work too. Glow-in-the-dark tape or paint are great too for low light and no light shooting. If your rear sight is some kind of small aperture or peep sight, you can drill it out to a diameter of 4 to 4.5 millimeters to make it into a ghost ring. Notch-style rear sights can be widened a little bit with a triangular jeweler's file. That last one can be very easy to screw up if you don't keep the file perfectly level, and the improvements it yields aren't that big anyway, so I don't recommend it unless you really can't stand notch sights. Some guns come with rail tops and no sights at all, so we'll start with the aftermarket rail-mounted sights. First of all, stay the fuck away from canted iron sights. If you don't get why, tilt your gun 45 degrees and watch the BBs when you pull the trigger. Anyway, most rail-mounted sights have the same height over bore as standard AR-15 sights, with elevation adjustment on the front sight and windage on the rear, so you can actually mix and match quite a bit. The front sights are mostly the same, but there's a little more variety with the rear sights, and that's what you should base your decision on. They fall into 2 broad categories: earless column sights and eared sights. The ears are meant to protect the rear aperture from being damaged or bent, and the idea behind earless sights is to have a big beefy column that doesn't need protection in the first place. Stick with the eared rear sights. The ears remain visible during low focus aiming and help naturally guide the front sight into the rear aperture, whereas low focus aiming with earless rear sights is usually a game of find the aperture. I do want to mention 2 particular sets of rail-mounted sights that are head and shoulders above the rest in my opinion. Magpul M-Bus sights and clones thereof are great if you use the large aperture. Then there's the Diamondheads. If you drill out the small aperture on the rear sight and cut it into a gutter, These things are awesome. I'd go as far as to say that they're hands down the best irons on the market. Now, before you leave a comment bitching about me making a $240 set of sights my top recommendation, you can find cheap clones on the usual mega corporate suspects. Moving on to factory sights, pistol sights are kinda just okay. They get the job done, but there's not a whole lot you can do to improve them aside from painting them. Same goes for AK pattern sights, since they're basically just pistol sights but adjustable and with a longer sight radius. H&K's iconic drum sights can range from decent to crappy, depending on the brand and model. If the gun in question features the open gutter CQB sight or an extra large diopter, they do alright, but if not, you'll have to drill one of the holes out or make it into a notch or gutter yourself.
Ew! Dude! What the fuck?
On top of that, the windage adjustment is fidgety and requires a Phillips head screwdriver in order to adjust the sight and lock it in place with a set screw, while the drum itself is used to adjust elevation, if it has any elevation adjustment at all. The price tag of the gun also reflects how well the drum locks into position, which in turn can affect accuracy. UMP/G36 sights are actually pretty great on either setting. No modifications needed. M14 sights are pretty poor, unless you drill out the peep sight and throw the gun in the trash because it's a fucking M14.
Know your fucking place, trash!
FN SCAR sights aren't all that great either. The rear peep is tiny, and even after you drill it out like I did, it still sucks for low focus aiming like every other column sight. Last but definitely not least are AR-15 sights. They're among the best you can get when it comes to factory sights in my opinion for reasons I described earlier, and many other guns emulate them to some degree. All of the adjustments are done on the rear sight without any tools, which is great for making adjustments mid-game. Carrying handles are nice too, especially when you can bolt on a rail and have it double as a riser. There's lots of other niche guns that I didn't mention because I don't have enough hands-on experience with them to intelligently comment on them. That being said, most of them use some variation of the sight patterns I've covered, so you should be able to figure out for yourself what to seek out, what needs handiwork, and what should be avoided or fitted with an optic. I have plans to make guides for both red dots and scopes, but those are a long way out. I hope this video was helpful, and thank you for watching.
Are you up? Hey, oh, hit. Yeah, I'm fucked too. Medic! 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 We need a medic on D-Day.
Yeah. Yeah, no.
Yeah, you know what? Fuck it. We're out. We're out. Good job stopping that attack, guys.